I would like to continue with the next part of the session, which has two presentations. The session is on impact of Brexit on veterinary applications and marketing authorisations. And the first presentation will be by Ms. Sandra van Lievendaal, who is heading the long-term and special projects office here at EMA and dealing with the legal questions for the agency's more strategic options, which obviously Brexit is. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivo. So, as introduced, I'm a lawyer, so I will focus in my presentation on the legal consequences that Brexit causes to us as regulators, but also for you as stakeholders. And so, and then my presentation will be complemented by my colleagues who will provide you some further guidance from a practical and procedural perspective on how the required changes can be implemented. So you will notice from my first slide, which I will quickly go through, that from the moment that the UK submitted its notification to withdraw from the Union on the 29th of March 2017, the agency, together with the Commission, we started preparing and reflecting on the guidance that we could provide to our stakeholders. So as this table mentions, in May 2017, there was the ECE notice to the marketing authorization holders published, and in parallel, we had already a first question and answer document published, which really summarized the main legal consequences, the legal requirements set down in the pharmaceutical legislation. It was followed up in November with the practical guidance, which my colleagues will further elaborate upon, which gives you more practical procedural guidance on how to implement the legal changes. And then in December we came with the first update because we listened to the queries of the stakeholders, we listened to your concerns, and we then, in our first update of the Q&A, we added some questions and answers, already those that we can clarify at this moment in time. And published the revision. Then in January there was another revision made, but this was more to all three documents. This was more of a technical nature. It was to give an introduction part which is worded in a similar manner across borders. So it's not only, you know, the changes to the pharmaceuticals world, but it's also, you know, across the board with regard to medical devices and so on. So the wording of the introduction is therefore now worded in a harmonized manner. So very quickly, the notice to the marketing authorization holders, it clearly mentions what was already mentioned by our colleagues, you know, in Brussels this morning, that unless there is a ratified withdrawal agreement that establishes another date, the UK will become a third country from the 30th of March 2019. So this is the working scenario the agency works against in order to provide you with guidance. And this means also the working scenario we are applying to provide you with guidance is that from the 30th of March 2019, the EU pharmaceutical legislation will not any longer be applicable to the United Kingdom. So companies, as already mentioned this morning, are reminded to plan in advance in order to avoid any impact on the continuous supply of medicines, because this is, of course, our major concern. It's the animal health that needs to be taken into account. And I would like to mention those documents, of course, are focusing on human and veterinary medicinal products because they fall both under our scope. The question and answers is what I call the more legal document because it gives the legal interpretation of principles that need to be applied in a consistent manner across the pharmaceutical network. Now, this is a document that we work together with the Commission in very close collaboration, and that's also why there are legal interpretations. So that's why the update sometimes requires some time before we can publish further questions and answers, because it needs to be clearly scrutinized, and the legal interpretation, again, needs to be consistent across borders, not just, the principles applied in the pharmaceutical field. As already mentioned also this morning, there are equivalent guidance, if not identical, for the mutual recognition and DCP procedures, because we are dealing with the network as a whole. And as said, we are working on further updates, and we hope that in the second quarter of this year, or maybe a little bit earlier, we can come up with our next batch of published Q&As. The procedural guidance is more under the authority of the agency. We, of course, also liaise with the Commission to understand and to see that they are in full agreement with our guidance. But this is more practical procedural guidance, of course, respecting the legal requirements. But we tried, where possible, to provide a simplified approach in order to implement all the required changes within the deadline. And so it describes the changes and related fees for the centralized procedure. Now, the next part of my presentation will now focus on the legal requirements. So the first batch of requirements are establishment and location requirements. What happens to your authorization when you are a UK marketing authorization holder? Well, the working scenario is as of 30th of March, UK becomes a third country. The European legislation is not anymore applicable to the UK. So you are required to transfer your marketing authorization to a company, a holder, which is established in the Union. And by the 30th of March 2019, such transfer need to be completed and fully implemented. So I'm just at high level describing what's currently published in the Q&A. I'm just lifting the high principles. What happens if you're an applicant established in the UK? Please remember that for your applications that are expected to receive a Commission decision after 29 March 2019, there will be no Commission decision granted to UK established companies because UK will be a third country. So we really strongly recommend that you change your applicant to a legal entity established in the Union, and preferably even in advance of any upcoming submission. If you are a company based in the UK and you are also an SME, as of the 30th of March, the guidance for non-EU-based companies will apply. So what does this mean? Is that if you want to continue benefiting from the SME incentives, you need or to establish an SME entity in the Union, or you can benefit indirectly through the SME consultancy in the Union, which means that you can use an SME regulatory consultancy firm that can seek to benefit from the SME regulation on behalf of a non-EEA-based client, but both consultancy and the client need to meet the SME requirements, and of course the consultancy needs to be based in the Union. And this is, of course, in order to keep on benefiting from the financial and administrative assistance that SMEs are benefiting from. With regard to the MUM status, so if you are a UK company with a MUM status for your medicinal products, so the MUM's incentives will no longer be applicable after 29th of March 2019. So when you have a not yet authorized product with a MUM status, a MUM's classification, and because the classification is connected to the product indication, the classification is transferable with your product. For authorized products with MUM's limited market classification, please note that the transfer of the marketing authorization does not include the transfer of the classification. This has to be done through a different procedure. Another important element is the location or the residence of the UK QPPV. So you currently have UK QPPV. Unfortunately, the qualified person for pharmacovigilance needs also to be residing in the Union and needs to be carrying out his or her tasks in the Union. So, or, the person will have to move residence, or as a company, you might have to think of appointing a new qualified person for pharmacovigilance that's established in the Union or residing in the Union. With regard to local representatives that you might have which are located in the UK, we have two scenarios. If your UK nominated local representative is nominated for member states other than the UK, we would ask you to change, the local representative the UK local representative to a local representative located or residing in the Union. If it's a local representative, your UK local representative is only nominated for the UK as such, then this information becomes obviously obsolete after 29th of March 2019. Just the very high-level principles from a legal perspective on the manufacturing aspects, because I have my colleague Andre, which will provide you with much more detail. So if your manufacturing site is currently located in the UK, and it stays in the UK, please be aware that the active substances and the medicinal products that will be manufactured at that site in the UK will be considered as imported after 29th of March 2019, with all the consequences of an imported active substance or an imported product. With regard to the batch control site, it's currently located in the UK. Well, upon importation, the batch control needs to be conducted in a site in the Union. And your UK batch release site that you might currently have in this country, that you need to have a batch release site which is located in the Union. So you need to change your site. And all those changes require some time. So that's why we say, please start, if not yet, start working on those changes, because we know that this is time-consuming, also financial aspects related to it, but especially time-consuming. There are a few questions, and this is a little bit more technical, but there are a few questions linked to generic and hybrid products. So this is maybe important for companies who have generic and hybrid medicinal products. So the principle is that for generic hybrid products, they rely on data of a reference medicinal product that is or has been authorized in the Union. So for generic hybrid authorizations that were granted before 30 March 2019, they remain valid even if the reference product used for your authorization was a UK reference medicinal product. If your generic hybrid marketing authorization is granted after 29th of March 2019, or will be granted after 29th March 2019, please, and you need to use a reference product which was authorized in the EU 27 EEA, so no longer a UK reference medicinal product. And this will also facilitate the management of the generic hybrid products life cycle in the post-authorization phase. What impact does Brexit have on the global marketing authorization, in particular on the authorizations that were granted in the United Kingdom? So as you know, the global marketing authorization it's a concept that covers the initial marketing authorization and all subsequent developments of the original authorization or of the original medicinal product. The concept, so the global marketing authorization, is accompanied by a single regulatory data protection period. And such period starts running from the grant of the initial marketing authorization. And now we come to the important point, because authorizations that were granted before the 30th of March 2019 by the UK are still to be considered, or are still to be, it should not say can still, but are to be considered as the initial marketing authorization for the purpose of calculating data exclusivity and the market protection periods. Because at that time, the UK was still a member state. This is what it means for your application form, because in an application form for a hybrid or generic application, marketing authorization application, you have to identify 3 reference products. With regard to the reference products that you use for the calculation of the data exclusivity, so if your hybrid generic authorization is granted before March 2019, you can use, as per now, all member states, so the EU 27 EEA and the UK. If you expect to receive an authorization after March 2019, you have you can use a UK reference medicinal product, but only if that authorization for the UK product was issued before 30th of March 2019 because of the reasons I explained earlier. With regard to the reference product that you will use for product information, again, if your authorization is expected to be issued before 30th of March 2019, you can use, as per current status, the EU27 EEA or UK reference medicinal product. For authorizations granted after March 2019, there you can no longer rely on the UK reference medicinal product. And then there is a specific question in the Q&A that relates to the bioequivalence studies, because of course that's very important. So what happens with the sourcing of the reference product used in bioequivalence products? In studies, sorry. So for authorizations before March 2019, again the same to all member states and the UK included. After March 2019, no more UK reference products for the sourcing of the bioequivalence studies, so the batches of the UK reference product. However, there is an exception explained in the footnote of the Q&A, and that relates to really the exceptional case where you have a new application that you would submit for your hybrid or your generic authorization. You submit it before March 2019, but your bioequivalence studies with the UK reference product have already been finalized. And then the advice is to contact the authorities of a centralized procedure, the agency, because then we need to see if it's acceptable or not, because we don't want unnecessary repetition of studies in human and animals. And then my last slide, which is a very quick one, before I hand over. What does Brexit mean for well-established use applications? So, to claim that the active substance in the claimed indication and target species have been used in well-established use in the Union for at least 10 years, all the UK data that you all the data that you source from the UK before 30 March 2019 can be used. With regard to the sunset clause, in the exceptional case where your product would be marketed only on the UK market, then the 3 years timer, the time clock, starts ticking from the placing on the UK market, so the last placing on the UK market before 30th of March 2019. And this is if your product was not placed on any other market in the European Union. And with regard to contact persons, we expect that the contacts for the product defects recalls are in the European Union, so no longer in the UK. And this is also recommended for the contact persons for the applicant and the marketing authorization holder. Thank you.
We will continue to the next presentation, which again is a presentation by two presenters. The presentation is on EMA practical guidance, including post-authorization aspects and impact on manufacture and supply. It will be given by Behan Mustavov, who's from the Veterinary Regulatory and Organizational Service in the Veterinary Division, and Andrei Katalin from Manufacturing and Quality Compliance Services.
In the next few slides, I will address the practical aspects concerning how UK market authorization holders for centrally authorized products are expected to transfer their market authorization, update the local representative in the product information, change the qualified person for pharmacovigilance, and also transfer the MUMS limited market classification. After that, my colleague Andrei will focus on the necessary changes related to the manufacturing and supply. I'll start now by giving you some background information that led us to implement a certain level of simplification to the market authorization transfer procedure. From a quantitative point of view, there are 20 market authorization transfers that are expected as a result of Brexit. And that is a significantly high number compared to what we have usually on annual basis. From a qualitative point of view, the agency identified the need to smoothen the procedural handling while maintaining the regulatory and legal requirements. And the primary legal requirement being that there should be one marketing authorization transfer submitted for each marketing authorization. The agency also identified the need for increased flexibility of the MA transfers with regard to any other ongoing procedures and also with regard to the implementation period for the new marketing authorization holder to take their responsibility. As a result of these considerations, mock-up requirements have been waived, but only when the marketing authorization holder name and address change. Anyway, we expect that this will be the case for the majority of marketing authorization transfers. It has also been agreed that the implementation period can be longer than 6 months, but never exceeding 29th of March. Another important element that has been implemented is that any other regulatory procedure can now run in parallel to the MA transfer. To optimize the best running of the MA transfer, we are establishing very close interactions with the marketing authorization holders to advise on the best use of these simplifications. We are open for preparatory teleconferences. We can offer pilot submissions and also pre-submission checks. We had already preparatory teleconferences with 2 marketing authorization holders, and I'm pleased to inform you that the experience from these 2 teleconferences is very positive and very helpful for us, both for the marketing authorization holders and also for the agency. In any case, all marketing authorization holders that are affected are advised to contact the agency as soon as possible by sending email to an email address that you are all very familiar with, which is vet.applications. With regard to the update of local representatives in the product information, we can face 2 scenarios as mentioned by Sandra earlier. The first scenario will be where the UK local representative is also the representative for another EU EEA member state. In this case, the product information need to be updated and the local representative for that EU EEA member state need to be appointed before 30th March. The way of doing this preferably is with any procedure that affects the marketing authorization and that impacts on the annexes. So, for example, this can be done with type 1A, 1B, type 2, renewal, PSUR variation that require changes to the product information. But on the other hand, if the life cycle of the product is not very active or there is no procedure that finalizes before 30th March, then a standalone type 1A immediate notification variation can be submitted. The second scenario will be for those cases where the UK local representative only represents the UK. In such cases, the deletion of the UK representative and the update of the product information should happen only after 29th of March next year, and preferably with the earliest regulatory procedure that affects the annexes next year. Another change that needs to take place concerns the qualified person for pharmacovigilance. The relocation of the QPPV currently located in the UK to a EU EEA member state should be notified through the submission of a variation type 1A, immediate notification, and must be finalized before 30th March next year. As outlined in Sandra's presentation, the MUMS limited market classification is linked to the product indication and therefore transferable together with the product. But to formally acknowledge the transfer, a separate letter from the UK-based sponsor applicant is required, officially notifying the agency of the transfer of the classification to a sponsor applicant established in the EU EEA member state. And I will now hand over to Andre to present the necessary changes related to manufacturing and supply.
Thank you very much, Bian. So in the second part of this presentation, we will be focusing to the required changes to manufacturing and supply, and more specifically to three activities, and that is importation, batch control, and the batch release side. So to begin with the importation side, we would like to strengthen the message that it is a requirement by Article 55(1) of Directive 2001/82/EC for medicinal products manufactured in third countries to be imported into the Union by an authorized importer, so a manufacturing site in the EA that is authorized to perform in the importation activity. So in terms of practical impact or how this would impact, we currently foresee two scenarios. There are finished products that are currently manufactured in the UK, and as UK will be considered a third country, there will be a need for an importation site to be registered in the Union, and the requirement is that this importation site is approved before the 30th of March 2019, so as of that date it should be available. The second possible scenario that we currently foresee is for finished product that is currently manufactured in a third country outside of the Union, but the importation site which is currently registered is an importation site in the UK. So in this case, this importation site, the new importation site in the Union, will need to be again approved by 30th of March 2019. Yeah. In terms of batch control, in terms of batch control, again, there is a requirement that all products manufactured outside in third countries that are imported into the Union need to undergo a full qualitative and quantitative analysis in accordance with the specifications registered in the dossier. And I think this is also one of the questions that we've received as part of the Q&A session for this for today's meeting, and it's important to emphasize that a full qualitative and quantitative analysis needs to be done in accordance with the specifications registered. So in terms of the practical impact for the batch control side in the Union, we foresee cases where the finished product is currently manufactured in the UK, and of course, going forward, these products will be considered imported in the Union as of 30th of March 2019, and therefore a quality control site in the Union will need to be registered, so a laboratory that is authorized to do these tests. We are aware that this is the quality control site and the transfers of the methods from one laboratory to another is quite a laborious and long transfer, so we would like to strengthen the message that this needs to be started, if not already, as soon as possible. The second possible scenario is for finished products that are manufactured currently in a third country, and these products are tested upon importation by a quality control site in the UK. This will no longer be possible as of 30th of March 2019, so therefore the request is to have a batch control site in the Union approved before that date. The third activity or responsibilities for the batch release site, and this is for the qualified person to certify the batch for release. It's a requirement that each batch of product manufactured in a third country needs to be certified by a qualified person to ensure that the product was manufactured in accordance with GMP and that the product is also meeting the specifications outlined in the marketing authorization. So again, there are two possible scenarios. The products that are manufactured in the UK, these will be imported in the Union as of 30th of March 2019, and therefore they will need to be batch released in the Union by a batch release site authorized by one of the member states. The second possible scenario that we've seen is for finished products that are manufactured in a third country, but these are currently released by a batch release site in the UK. Again, this would need to be moved via a variation, and this variation needs to be approved before 30th of March 2019. The EMA procedural guidance includes more detail as to the required variations depending on the operations that the site is manufacturing, and the table that you are seeing on the left side of the slide is included in this procedural guidance. It's important to strengthen that all variations are type 1As, with the exception of the addition of quality control sites for biological methods where type 2 is required. And in terms of the variations submitted, there are two approaches that can be followed. One is the replacement, meaning that an addition and a deletion of site is performed in the same variation, or there can be an addition of the sites and then a deletion using an A7 scope. But it's again important to emphasize that any UK importation, batch control or batch release sites will need to be deleted as of that date. And then, of course, in terms of variations, there's a possibility that multiple sites can be deleted in one A7 scope. So in terms of what's coming up next, there will be further updates to the EMA EC question and answers, and on the EMA procedural guidance. And as Sandra was mentioning, updates are expected in the second quarter of this year. There are already topics identified by the EMA Secretariat coming through questions from stakeholders, such as further clarification on manufacturing, supply, and inspections. But in case you have any further questions specifically for veterinary centrally authorized products, you are encouraged to address any query to the vet applications mailbox. And if there are any general queries that are related to Brexit, that these are submitted through the web-based form for Ask EMA on the EMA website. And that concludes the presentation.